Hello, everyone. Welcome to Everything is Gay, Even the Straight Stuff. I'm John McDonald, a playwright in the US of A. And today we are talking about one of the most wonderful and strangest things that is something that I grew up with. And so I'm kind of intrigued to see where this conversation goes. And of course, I'm back here with my lovely co host, Magnus.
Hello, everyone. Yes, I'm quite intrigued to see where it goes as well today. This really was something that blew up out of nowhere it was the early 2000s, wasn't it?
I wouldn't say it just blew up out of nowhere. I mean, when I was young, this show was relatively it, it was very controversial. It really wasn't until the 2000s when it kind of came into its own as an art form, though. Um,
Mm.
just to let people know what we're actually talking about, because we're talking about a couple of different concepts at once. First, we're going to talk about South Park, the musical specifically, and then we're going to talk about the TV show. Um, and the reason we're going to talk about this is that for kind of September into October, we're talking a little bit about the devil in pop culture in a couple of different ways. And so the devil is in the details, specifically about South Park. But yes, the movie was a revelation, and it came out in 1999, actually, I believe.
So I was almost on the ball when I said early 2000s. I was just a slight year or so off by my dating.
It's true, and it's a really interesting and provocative title. I would argue the title South Park Bigger, Longer, and Uncut is actually a part of the legacy of South Park and is probably the time when they actually started to own their controversy in a positive way. And of course, now it's came back to bite them a little bit. But Bigger, Longer, and Uncut was for so many reasons sort of one of the first great new generational musicals that it feels I guess it feels more original than some of the other musicals we have from this particular generation of time. So,
Hmm. I feel I should add a bit of context to my comment earlier then when I say it blew up. I think I'm viewing it from the UK, Europe perspective here. Now, we had South Park on what we call Channel 4 over here. We've got five main terrestrial channels that anyone can access with the television, and South Park was always on late at night on Channel 4, and it was seen as very much like a hip teenager thing, very naughty, very over the top. It was popular for sure. It was really popular. It started off straight away from being popular, but I don't think anyone had quite experienced anything like an adult animated cartoon movie at that point over here. So when the movie came over, that's what I kind of mean that it became a bit of an instant classic for that period from people
yeah,
from my generation that watched it. Um, and I don't think there's that many people that I knew that didn't see it in the end, and probably multiple times, just because it was something so different. Yeah, we have to remember this was before, um, if we go to other influences, something like anime, manga, etc. That was very much just taking off in the States at that period. Um, and it was still not as, the popularity of it still took until the early 2010s to really get going. Um, so certainly like adults and teenagers loving animation and having like adult theming in it was not something that we really knew over here at that point.
yeah, and it was something we were more familiar with here in America because we had shows like home movies, which was quite popular, at least for me, The Critic and Duckman. So South Park was sort of new, but it was sort of in the line of something we expected. And of course, before the film, we'd had South Park since 1997 over here. But before the film, it had been popular, but it had really kind of stagnated because most of us that had discovered it in middle school were not quite out of high school at that point.
Hmm.
And so it was very much like it felt the humor was very particular to a certain sort of adolescent, which I think it has
Hmm.
continued to be. And I think when we talk about the show in a greater context, it will it really does have a period of stagnation. It has some like great moments every season, and there's some very iconic things, but generally speaking, it's seen as for a certain group. It's not really
Mm,
seen as for everyone. And I feel like the South Park movie, being a movie about movies and about the reaction to it, its view on censorship is actually, it helps it, and it's something that we don't see as much of in the rest of South Park. Oddly enough, they South Park wants to poke fun at everyone, so it doesn't seem to take a side. But in this particular instance, at its most successful, almost, South Park does take a side, and it's on the side of the devil. But of course, the devil is a sympathetic character here, whereas opposed to something like Carmen, where the devil is all evil, here the devil is a very sympathetic character, and is given one of the best "I Want" songs, probably in movie musicals, if I'm honest.
mm. Uh, no, I see what you mean. I do the Devil's sort of what would you call that song? It's a it's a character song, but it's also
Yeah,
sort of a I want to be free um, from this role and torment, etc.
yeah.
I
It's
know
it's
the one.
sort of
Hmm,
so it's usually called a torch song or an "I Want" song.
hmm.
Sometimes it's
Oh,
the 10 o'clock
that's it.
song. Yeah, and it's
Yes.
supposed to be the song where the audience gets behind the character. Usually it's done by the princess. Here it's done by the devil, but the devil the devil is really just not happy in South Park over the course of his run in the show. He's always played sympathetic. His really great cameo in the episode where Stan discovers he's addicted to online to phone gaming,
Hmm,
and he does like a PowerPoint presentation about addiction and like dopamine receptors.
hmm,
It's a really whimsical take on the devil, and it's something that South Park did really well because it's a different version of the devil than we'd ever had, especially in America. And I think it works pretty universally for whatever your version of evil is.
hmm,
Specifically, they are an American. They live in an American Christian society, and so their version of the devil was that more classic devil character.
hmm. So, with the movie overall, what do you think its main point was beyond to be sort of like over the top and do the classic South Park thing of trying
Yeah,
to rile people up? What do you think the main point of it was?
I think the main point was of it that they could do a movie musical, honestly, because the South Park movie predates the Book of Mormon, I think even. It postdates
Mm,
the musical they did called Cannibal, which isn't very good, but it's very them. South Park, the movie is about them showcasing the fact that they were developing new technology so they could actually
mm,
keep up with the news. This was the start of that. I remember the anecdote of, I think they got a letter from Andrew Lloyd Webber about the Save Canada medley,
mm,
about how much that like traditional theatrical people loved what South Park, the movie musical, was doing. And so for them, it was sort of about legitimacy and stepping into their new age, which they've done again now with Paramount, and
mm,
how they release the new structure of their episodes, or will after the election because they're not coming back. But so like if you consider the first few seasons kind of their trial run preteen ness, then you can kind of mark up to South Park Bigger, Longer, and Uncut. And then if you go from like South Park into Bigger, Longer, and Uncut into like Coon and Friends, you can kind of tell where it's the generation of them stepping into maturity a little bit. Um, and then they actually step into maturity using the song Landslide at some point much later in the series. But yeah, you can sort of like look at the generational ages of South Park and use sort of the movie as them moving into their kind of more slicker, updated animation, and also their continued desire to remain apathetic to politics and to lampoon everyone, but unsuccessfully creating issues like Trump. which is part of, they had a big hand in that and they feel sorry about it. But at the time, they were just like, we're just going to make fun of everyone, lol. So,
Hmm.
yeah.
Yeah. Uh, yes, that's a definite unfortunate side of things. And, but, they can't really shoulder the blame for Trump solely. There's a lot of factors in that. If we're going to go down that route, we could always say that The Simpsons had something to do with it as well, because they predicted President Trump many, many years before 2016 even came about, didn't they?
Yeah. And I don't blame South Park completely. I know some have. But for me, it's like their desire to remain completely apolitical created a situation that when they take a political stance like they have in the movie, it's so
Yeah.
much better than when they're just like, we're going to lampoon everyone. And I think that's one of the movie's strengths is that they actually take a
Mm.
stand, and the controversy of them siding with the devil, which is something very taboo in America and something taken very seriously in religious circles, is actually, I think it's stronger when they do it because they do it with a point. Book of Mormon has the
Mm.
same thing where it's at its strongest when they do it with a point. Um, One of their strongest of the um, kind of the new South Park generation for me is the Black Friday trilogy, where they sort of lampoon Game of Thrones by taking the Game of Thrones model and turning it into a kind of an old school version of Black Friday. And I think
Mm.
it's genius. I love the Black Friday trilogy. It's hilarious. So like when they did stuff with the point, it really is really great. Um,
Yes.
also the devil is very relatable. Like just offhand, like he wants to be free of the thing that he's doomed to do. I mean, who doesn't relate to that?
That that's very true. And for me, to talk about a couple of points about the movie that I really like. Um, so firstly, I love the way it basically lampshades overreaction. Um, you know, the parents getting like completely over the top about the Canadian. Oh, what was the Canadian comedy duo's name? Oh, was it
It,
Phil? Oh,
it's Terrence and Phillip, by
yes.
the
Oh,
way,
his
who are voiced by Stone and Parker, by the way. So that's sort of their analog into the world.
So I love the fact that one of the main narrative threads of the movie, which really pushes forwards, is parents overreacting, and it starts to ramp up to ridiculous heights. Um, it was basically tongue in cheek against people that were overreacting to the very nature of South Park itself, and were trying to cause controversy and sort of taking it to, dare I say, what the logical extreme is, the end result, and basically showing how ridiculous it gets. Like, where do
Yeah,
you draw the line between getting over the top like that? But as you're saying, because they never took a real stance within the show, unlike a movie, um, it sadly has been getting to that logical extreme with, you know, cancel culture and censoring of content and everything of that point in the current age. Um,
well, and in the
it's sadly
director's,
mm.
oh, go ahead.
Oh no, please go ahead.
Well, in the director's commentary for South Park, Bigger, Longer, and Uncut, they talk about this movie. Sort of, they don't say it outright, but it's sort of this implied thing is that this is a movie about what happens when people don't talk to each other, which is sort of an ironic thing. But it's about the idea that the whole reason Sheila goes off the deep end is that Kyle can't be honest with his mom about growing up and about you know kids are weird, they're vulgar, and like the whole idea is that Sheila has this idea of her son Kyle as this like perfect little angel being corrupted by these two Canadian comedians who have done nothing but ply their trade. And so it's this idea of like standing up for yourself, but it's also this idea of when you don't talk, this is what happens. The world gets destroyed. Um,
Mm.
it's an interesting premise, and it's done in that South Park style that is undeniable. Um, it's a great movie cover too, because you see all kind of the main characters of the film sitting down to watch a movie. It's a movie about movies and about what happens when you make a controversial one.
Mm,
And it's
yeah.
such it would read so meta, but South Park does it so well, and it's got so many good jingles. I mean, we
Oh,
still sing the Brian Boitano song whenever Brian Boitano's in town, that kind of thing.
yes. And who can forget Blame Canada, um, which was such a memorable song from the movie. And the fact, where did he perform it? Did Robin Williams lead a live action rendition of it during one of the Academy Awards?
I know they've done some orchestral versions of their work, but I don't actually know. It seems like Robin Williams would enjoy doing something like that.
I know for a fact he did that. And I've seen like repeats of the recording on YouTube. I just cannot for the life of me remember exactly what award ceremony he did at, and for which he got a standing ovation.
So he
Um,
did it at the 1999 Oscars and the
oh,
72nd Academy Awards. So one of them he did it where he did it live with people playing the characters, which is kind of neat. Um, so yeah, actually that was shortly after Mary Kay Bergman, who voiced Wendy, had died. So it was sort of
oh,
a monument to Wendy as well, which was neat.
oh! I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Oh, she was such a big part of the show in the beginning. Um, I can't remember how big a presence she is nowadays, but oh, that's sad to hear the voice actress die.
Yeah. Wendy has come back. Actually, Wendy is one of the better characters that does like a superhero thing in the Coon and Friends. She plays Call
Oh,
Girl, this character that has like 10 cell phones and her power is canceling people. But it's done in a very playful, tongue-in-cheek way where you don't hate it as much as it sounds from the premise. But yeah, Wendy has come back and into her own. She has a couple of really good female-centered episodes where she kind of
mm,
passes the Bechdel test, which is not something most of South Park can say, but I would argue Wendy is actually better in the modern era than she was in the beginning of the show. Like
oh,
I feel like after this film, she really comes into kind of her own for a little bit.
mm,
So
yes. Um, so just thinking back a bit. So are we? Do you have any more points about the movie to bring up, sir? Because I'm just thinking about mentioning some of my favorite South Park bits, if that's possible.
I think there's a lot of the South Park bits inside of the film. I do think this
Mm.
is kind of the last time we see Big Gay Al. I feel like this is his kind of exit transition from the show. This is before Randy kind of goes off the rail as a main character. He gets really fleshed out starting from this point, but this is like the beginning of the ascension of Randy. And
Okay.
this is also before Mr. Garrison goes through all of the gender transitions and before he becomes the analog for Trump, which is why they've decided to not make any new episodes until after the election because they just can't handle doing that again. Um, but yeah, I think from
Mm,
this point, because it's after this film, we lose the actor that played Chef, so they have to do the Chef episode where it's a veiled insult against Scientology or whatever it is. And
yes.
so this is really like you can really mark from the movie up until when we start getting the kind of serialized trilogy episodes like Imagination Land. It's a whole nother.
Oh,
It's sort of
classic.
the renaissance of the South Park universe. And
Mm,
bearing in mind, I'm not going to have us do like a list of episodes like we did for Treehouse of Horror because there were, I think it's 382 episodes, and my brain can't. My brain doesn't have that
yeah.
ability.
And also, dare I say, when you have something that's been going on for so long, there's going to be weak stuff amongst the strong things. But like, and we're not really concerned about those that of low quality. We're concerned about the memorable moments that really capture the cultural zeitgeist, aren't we?
I mean, I'm up for doing low quality at some point, but when you have
Mm,
episodes like Casa Bonita, where Eric literally tricks one of the butters into like believing the world has ended just so we can go to a Mexican themed restaurant in Denver. Casa
mm,
Bonita is the reason Casa Bonita, the restaurant in real life, got saved by them because they loved it so much. So there's undeniable impact that has leaked into the real world. I have not been to Casa Bonita, but if I'm ever in Denver, that is one stop that I will make.
Well, it sounds almost like it's part of the unofficial South Park tour of locations
I think so. I would agree with that.
then. But yes, I know what you mean about a movie like this, a point like this within a franchise is a great place to look at where the existing cast is, at where the theming and such is. You mentioned about Big Gay Al.
Yeah.
Um, I will say that he did get a significant part in a later part of the franchise, but it wasn't the movie. Well, it wasn't the movie. It wasn't the specials or the show I'm particularly thinking of. I'm thinking of the well-received first game, South Park: The Stick of Truth. Um,
Yes.
because in that, I mean, you have a whole level that's devoted to the shall we say, the inside of Big Gay Al.
Yes.
Um, and
Actually,
that
it's
was
the inside of Mr. Slave, who is one of the other
oh,
kind of major queer characters of South Park,
oh,
who does really come into his own. So, yeah, you can
oh,
be forgiven for
oh,
mixing them up.
oh, I'm terribly sorry. Well, you see, there you go then. I clearly did remember Big Gay Al. I just completely mixed up my men of the streets, shall we say.
It happens, and it's the way that it's something interesting because South Park handles queerness both with kid gloves, but also doesn't glamorize it. Mr. Slave's an interesting character because he's both pro kink, but not pro kink at the same time. You could do a whole episode just on Mr. Slave and the Mr. Slave
Mm,
Garrison episodes and the way that Garrison's sexuality influenced his run as the Trump analog, of course. I do think I'm not actually sure what I think about it. It's one of the things I'd have to think about more. I will say
mm,
the video games are kind of wonderful. I'm actually a big fan, not of them as RPGs, but of them as like microcosms of what we love about the show. Um,
yes.
I do think the Coon and Friend series, which was probably the most well known of the serialized segment of episodes, you could probably release just a Coon and Friends DVD set on its own with everything, is kind of high camp, high hilarity nonsense. But it makes sense in terms of like people becoming tired of like superhero things. And I
Yes.
think it works, yeah.
Oh, I feel ashamed now because I can't believe I got my characters mixed up with stages. I mean, I can see why I had the mix up happen, but I can't believe I still mixed them up.
I mean, I wouldn't
Oh,
feel shame about that. The fact of the matter is that the queer characters in South Park are all kind of queer femme men, except for the one episode with lesbians that is a 300 analog. Like you really can't be faulted for mixing up Mr. Slave and Big Gay Al because they both were essentially the same femme male character. They just decided to
mm,
ditch Big Gay Al for Mr. Slave because Mr. Slave had more to do. It's like
yes,
the cook from the Golden Girls from the first episode. They just couldn't give
yes.
him anything to do, so they kind of run him out of the show.
And also, dare I say, like the theming, like they were starting to go towards the girls having some money troubles and such. So having a sort of live-in helper, cook, etc. That would have like given them a bit too much affluence, if that makes sense.
Yeah,
Um, because and I felt like, oh, sorry to go off on Golden Girls a bit. I do feel that that added a good little bit of realism about, women after, like, either if they've chosen not to get married or when they reach pension age or after their husbands have passed away. That probably was and still is quite a concern for a number of women about making ends meet and such, and what do you do? Do you keep working in later life, etc.? And how do you market yourself and your skills?
yeah. Something I would like to do for South Park, which we didn't do for Golden Girls, but might be worth doing.
Ooh.
I would love to do like do an episode about South Park specifically about their parodies, because not just the Black Friday trilogy.
Ooh.
The
Yes.
my favorite Halloween episode is the
Mm.
episode where Randy decides to buy Blockbuster and it turns into an homage to The Shining, where he's in like the last Blockbuster in South Park. And like there's
Mm.
the great ending segment with him frozen in the snow, having like a back and forth with his wife about getting back the money he sank into Blockbuster, and not understanding that people don't rent movies anymore; they just stream things. It's genius. It's incredible, and I kick myself that I couldn't think of because it's an amazing analog. Like it's literally almost beat for beat The Shining, and I love The Shining, and I feel like
Mm.
that the ability for South Park to parody things that exist in a way that makes it feel fresh. I do think the member berries is something that as a concept works, but I think they were so exhausted with Trump that they didn't get to like experience it to its full potential. But I think
Mm.
like the member berries are another version of that. The
Mm.
Timmy and Jimmy episodes, and they were figuring out what to do with Timmy and Jimmy, were sort of also that analog of like the coming of age and like the very special episode. But South
Yes.
Park for me is almost at its strongest when it's parodying, lampooning something because
Mm.
that feels like its heritage is the lampoon, and that's where
Yes.
it feels strongest.
In a way, going back to the whole thing that you were saying again, when they're making a point, when it's not just sort of like, when it's not just Family Guy with throwaway humorous lines and such, when they're actually taking something and actually doing some proper parody of it.
Yeah.
Um, I I have to admit, I honestly can't think of a good example of a South Park parody off the top of my head. I'd have to go away and have a think of what ones in particular
Yeah.
caught my attention. So that means some rewatching. Ha ha
Oh
ha.
darn. Oh darn.
Oh darn, indeed. But if we're going to talk about quickly an example of a show that tried to do parody and failed in comparison to how well South Park does it, um, I dare I bring up Family Guy and the Star Wars movies. Uh, it, like it was so flat, those Star Wars parodies that they did. They had a few jokes here and there, but I was actually quite what's the word? I suppose slightly startled over the fact that they kind of played it too straight. It felt like just an animated take on Star Wars, whereas you mentioned about the great Black blockbuster Shining parody. Um, that actually takes a story, but they do it in their own way that, as you say, came across as fresh. Um, there's a good reason why I've never rewatched the Star Wars Family Guy parodies afterwards, because it was very blah in comparison, which probably makes it actually memorable that it was so poor that it has stuck in my memory as a good example of that.
I would love to do an episode on Star Wars, but like the things that Star Wars influenced. So I'd love to talk about the Robot Chicken, and love to talk about the Family Guy because the Family Guy Star Wars episodes is a case of them being so enamored with the source material. Like they
Mm,
had literal people from Star Wars before Star Wars was Disney, like that was giving them permission to do things. And so it has a very different vibe than it's maybe like being too close to source material, you know?
it, yes, being too close to source material and not willing to sort of taint it with like humor in a way.
Yeah.
And I think that I use the word taint because I think that's how the people giving the permission would have viewed it. They didn't want this parody be too parodic to be too much of a parody, not like what South Park might have done themselves with the
Yeah.
material.
Because I think South Park doesn't have a problem lampooning things like Scientology. Like they did that plenty. They didn't have a
Mm,
problem with lampooning Kanye West. They didn't have a problem even with lampooning. I can't remember their name, but out the top of my head. But the interesting thing is that when they decided to stop doing what was expected of them, and they decided to stop killing Kenny, and they killed Kenny permanently to bring him back here in the movie, and then decided to bring him back, but as kind of his own character in the group of four, but also kind of not, depending upon what the story needed. they really opened up the world because they had a void to fill with Kenny that they kept trying to fill with other side characters. And it allowed for like the very fabulous Butters episodes where we discover
Mm,
Butters' dad is bisexual, which is a pretty good episode. It's like when they open up the world and take a chance like they did with the movie, they do something very special. The episode about people mistaking the UPS guy for like a serial adulterist is actually pretty good, and that's part of the newer pantheon of episodes. So they're not all hits,
mm,
but like there's some really great, like genuinely the idea of Randy Marsh's Lord is so absurd it just works because it doesn't make any sense. And I just love that when they push well. So to do a bigger episode. We're getting ready for Gay Christmas, aka Halloween. So these are like shorter, almost summer school type episodes again, or summer shorts. But
mm,
just to start off with the idea of South Park as this place where lampooning was welcomed, but it only really works at its strongest when they actually go for it and they aren't
mm.
shy about it. And they've done that with like
Yeah.
you can tell obviously
Mm.
because we're talking about them. So and they're still going.
Mm. I think the other part would be for me in terms of the impressions it made and such. I think some of the concepts they did in the earlier episodes like really stuck with me and such. Like for example, the very first episode, the premiere, um, Cartman gets a you know what probe. I don't think I can say the word on the
Yes,
podcast, so
we'll be
I should.
demonetized from the zero money we make.
um, oh, such a classic, and it was in a way it was the perfect episode to do as a first one because it's so absurd, but yet at the same time it's funny, it's catchy, it's memorable, um, and there's actually a little bit of creepiness with the aliens as well that
Yeah,
re really stuck with you. But if we're going to talk like real creepy, um, the second season, the seventh episode, I think it was City on the Edge of Forever or I forget the exact name of the title, but it's the episode where all the kids get stuck on the school bus as it's careering off the edge of the cliff. It's rocking back and forth, um, and they get told by the crazy lady if they try to get off the bus, they're going to get eaten by an evil creature. I was watching it late at night with my little brother when we were seeing it for the first time, and the moment the creature actually appeared with the screeching music and everything, I remember that we were both so terrified of it. In that was such a great impression. So it's not really a parody, but when South Park wants to do striking imagery that sticks with you, they can also do that as well.
yeah. I mean, I think about episodes. So the really controversial one was the Nambla episode, which was really amazing. The Marlon Brando Association episode, I like to call it,
Mm.
but also about they did a zombie analog with ginger kids called Gingivitis, which is
Oh,
hilarious and shameful, and it makes you like you shouldn't laugh, but it's kind of amazing. To have Eric Cartman turned into a minority who then creates a majority out of that minority.
mm.
Eric is really the analog for Trump, but they couldn't do that for a variety of reasons. So it's an interesting,
Oh,
yeah,
you.
the gingivitis episode is an interesting way in which you can push boundaries in a way that delights, I think.
We're going to talk about pushing boundaries. Do you remember the episode where Cartman decided to get revenge? He got revenge on a kid. I can't remember exactly what the child did,
Yeah,
but I don't think it was so. Oh, I think he was bullying Cartman by
yeah.
saying he was overweight. So Cartman did the sensible, level-headed thing and murdered the child's parents, turned them into chili, and fed them in the parent chili.
Which ironically is one of the best episodes because it has a continuity later, but the
Mm.
continuity comes in episodes 200 and 201, which are the episodes that you can't find outside of the DVD sets because they're the ones that depicted Muhammad. And so they're the ones that don't get played in Rewind. But the revelation that Scott Tenorman's dad is actually also Eric's dad which I'm spoiling for you right now because you haven't. I don't know if you've seen the episode, but it's lost to canon because of the controversy and because there were just so many literal death threats made toward the show that they actually had to, like, I think you can find it on DVD sales, but I'm not even sure if all sets have it. But it's this interesting thing about literally that was a line that they crossed that literally that was not even censorship. It was life or death, it felt like. So yeah, but
Mm,
it's an interesting thing of that Scott Tournament episode is really good. And that's a really good episode if you want to watch about how to heighten something as a writer. So yeah, but I want to do a longer discussion about South Park. So I think we're gonna wrap it up for right now, and then we're gonna come back with other episodes. We need to think a little bit more about South Park because I think there's more we can do with it. And I
mm.
actually kind of want to hear from our audience about what about South Park if they think about it or watch it. What would they like to talk about? Would they like to talk about the location? Would they like to talk about Randy and the ascension of Randy? As there's a really great YouTube video about how Randy Marsh became the best character, which I think the best character is Butters, but we're all Butters. And there are some episodes that make me uncomfortable, like the Tweak and Craig episode, that I kind of want to talk about. So I'll have to do a bigger episode. But for now, I think that's going to wrap it up for today. Do you have any final thoughts, Magnus, before we finish this up?
Mm, just to say, I suppose that this has made me curious to go and rewatch the movie all over again, and
Yes.
maybe see if there's any little points about it that I've forgotten about over the many years.
I mean, that's what Brian Baitano would do. Um,
Of course.
yes. But
Yeah.
we'll see you all next time on Everything is Gay, even the straight stuff. Have a great night, everybody.
Bye bye.